I'm Jordan Riley Swan, author and founder of Story Garden Publishing, where we create books across genres from fantasy to romantic comedies. I'm here with Laurie Cooper of Pub-Craft, a marketing agency that specializes in book promotions. Today, we're here to talk about how to build an author newsletter. And I've got my questions over here that I'm going to ask. But first, I'm going to go right off script, right out of the gate.
Of course.
I recently heard somebody say it is not a good idea to call it a newsletter, but it's okay to call them newsletters behind the scenes. But when you're doing your call to action, I've been hearing people say you actually want to call it a reader group or something along those lines. Have you heard anything like that? The newsletter tends to feel more cold and formal.
Yeah, I have. So, there's a certain school of thought where if you call it a newsletter, people will think like, oh, it's just another newsletter and I'm just another number, a subscriber. And ultimately, it's about having a relationship being built between you and a reader where they're a person that you're seeing. So yeah, you can change the way you're describing it. But on the other hand, there are some readers who are really familiar with the idea that authors have newsletters, right? And they look for that. They look for the newsletter on the site. So I think it comes down to the personality behind what you're doing. Like if you want to call it your squad or your team or your buds or whatever, go for it. But I don't really feel that that language is making a significant difference, especially right at the beginning. So just go with what feels right for you.
Okay. All right. So how important is it to have a author newsletter?
I would say hugely important. I would say it's pretty much your number one asset as an author, of course, other than your book.
Yes.
That's pretty important.
Other than the book.
Yeah.
Yes, your number one asset is the newsletter. And I assume that's because you can't control, like you post it on Facebook, but who are they going to show it to? And if you, okay, yeah, I can see that it could be a problem to try to use other venues to reach out to talk to your regular hardcore people. And if they've already give you their email, they're saying they like you well enough to read another book, which is nice.
Yeah, you've hit the nail on the head there. Like, if I can just add to that. I know you could. Absolutely. Well, I mean, you have enough experience with this, right? That you've seen that if you try and rely on social media, that can be a pretty significant hit or miss. And it can also be a huge time sink because it ultimately comes down to whether you're reaching your ideal readers. So having something that you can control to some extent, as you mentioned, helps so much. And then you can begin to actually build that relationship.
My ideal readers are the ones with money that give it to me. So which newsletter services have you tried and which ones would you recommend?
I've tried a bunch just in not only in different comms jobs I've had over the years, but working with different authors and consultants. So for example, ConvertKit, ActiveCampaign, MailChimp, MailerLite, Flowdesk, like the list goes on. My two favorites at this point, I just got blurry. My two favorites at this point are MailerLite, particularly for newer authors or those who would describe themselves as not being super tech savvy because their customer support is amazing. It's like 24 hours and you can always open a live chat and get help with anything. And a lot of their features are cost effective or they're free, which is really cool. And then Flowdesk is because even though they don't offer that much support by nature of being like a two-person team, they don't scale with the growth of your newsletter list. So you could have 10 subscribers or 100,000 subscribers and you're paying the same amount monthly.
And Flowdesk is what we use here at Story Garden.
That's right.
All right. So what type of content would you put in a newsletter so that it's not just a constant sales pitch?
So that depends on your audience. And I'm always harping about being reader centric. So what that means is understanding who your audience is, who likes your books, what genre are you in, what other authors occupy that same space, and then thinking about what kind of content that author would want to read. You hear a lot of coaches talking about how your audience can be a mirror for you. And that's true. I mean, it's not always like a one-for-one type situation, but ultimately, when you're trying to create content, you have to think about, is it entertaining? Is it inspirational? Is it educational? What's the message you want to communicate with your readership? And then that doesn't mean that you have to be constantly putting out content per se. Like for instance, if you're someone who is prolific and you release a lot, you might have enough just saying like, hey, this is out. Hey, here's a review opportunity. Hey, another thing is out. Here's an excerpt that you don't need to add anything else. But perhaps if you're someone who has a lot of story or emotion attached, or, a certain type of personality that likes to draw on like fun little contests or things that you might want to share with your readership, then you can add more of that kind of entertainment text that's actually going to get them interested. It sort of speaks to what you said before, where If someone's on your newsletter, you can imagine they're interested enough, right, that they've given you an invitation to continue emailing them. So you want to take them on this journey from that cold place, like, I don't even know you and I don't particularly care, I've got a lot going on, to that warm spot where it's like, I'm aware of you, I'm willing to learn more. And then that hot spot, right, that goes like, hey, I've purchased something and I'm willing to purchase again. And ideally you keep them all in this space. So that's the whole reader journey you're taking them on through your content. But it does come back to understanding who they are.
Do we use whips or cattle prods to keep them over in that?
Depends on our brand. Yeah.
I guess it does depend on the brand. Huh. Well, we do
Double
clean,
entendre.
we do clean and sweet and wholesome romance, so there's not too many
No
not too many
cattle
cattle
prods or
prods.
whips in our situation. Yeah. Although they're pretty relevant in a lot of the genres.
In the other
actually.
genres too, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, so how often should authors send out a newsletter?
I think it depends on how much you write. You know, if you have a release monthly or multiple releases monthly, you're going to be sending out a lot because you're going to want to offer announcements of that material, especially to your different segments if you are organizing it that way.
Mhm.
If I were to pick something like gun to my head, I had to say, hey, how often should you send this out? I would say once a month. Aim for that, and then you can calibrate from there depending on what works for you. I don't think it's a one size fits all.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So now here's the nuts and bolts of it. How do you actually build the newsletter?
Okay, so I think by far the best way to do that is through a reader magnet, and I'll come back to that in just a moment. The other excellent way to do it is, of course, through the back matter of your book. So if someone's already purchased it and they get to that end section, we talked about this a little bit in previous interviews, they can go ahead and click on a link that allows them to subscribe and continue to hear from you. So that's a great place to capture them. But of course, it requires that they actually have the book in hand. So that's when we come back to the reader magnet, where if you can offer a freebie incentive, a gift that someone might be interested in looking at, then they get a chance to sample your work and your writing, and then see if they have that moment where they're like, oh my gosh, I love this, I want to learn more. And then you make sure that the back matter, even in your freebie, is going to lead them to additional things that they can learn about you, so that regardless of where they receive it, whether they sign up to opt in to receive like a free chapter or coloring book or a gazette or a contest or a checklist or all the things you could do, they still keep coming back to more places to interact with you and continue to get immersed in the community you've created and all of those vibes you're inviting based on your brand.
Huh.
So those are definitely, I think, the top two, but you have some other excellent ways, like through cost-effective reader builders and cross promotion, for example.
Okay, okay. So where do you even go to find readers who are willing to sign up in the first place?
Well, you can use services available to you. It depends on how much money you want to spend as well, right? Like there are services that are pricier than others. Some great options that are pretty popular include BookFunnel, of course, and Story Origin. So then you can engage in newsletter swaps, niche group promos, like genre-specific contests, that kind of a thing. And then you can also list your reader magnet through those spaces. Now you can completely do this yourself as well if you like, in which case you might want to look to social media, find relevant hashtags, look for groups on Facebook, for instance, for if you wanted to look up like fans of high fantasy, for example, you could search that in your Facebook groups and filter it and see groups where you might be able to list a freebie or list an opportunity to sign up. Through review sites too, you might pick up some signups as well. Book Sirens, for example, and Booksprout, they both offer opportunities for those who have reviewed your arcs to sign up to your newsletter. So you just start trying to find out where your readers are, and that's a whole journey in and of itself, but you can do that with experimentation. And especially when you have a freebie, and it doesn't have to be a huge undertaking, it could be a quick short story or like I said, a coloring page, something like that. One of the simplest things to do is to take the first chapter of your book, for example, and to use that for lack of anything else. And then you can start offering that out so you can grip people to invite them in. But you need to take some experiments and take some time and then see what sticks.
Okay. Okay. So what's your opinion on newsletter swaps? Where authors reach out to another author and promote each other's authors in the newsletter?
I think newsletter swaps can be very valuable. It does depend on who you're swapping with. So there are always going to be winners and losers in this space, right? You're trying to find an ideal situation where both of you have a similar audience. or significant enough crossover that you're lifting each other up at the same time and, getting more eyes on your book on either side of the situation. So sometimes it works out that one person gets way more clicks or gets way more subscribes than the other person. And that's just the risk you take, and that's fine. But you want to think about who you are swapping with. I don't think it's a huge problem to cast your net wide in that case, because you're not really risking too much at that point, unless you're committing to reading all of the books that you're swapping with, which I don't recommend. I recommend saying something along the lines of, while you haven't had the pleasure to necessarily read in full the book that you are sharing, you wanted to make available some books on sale, or some books in KU, or some wide books, or whatever it is that makes sense in the genre you write in. So I think swaps can be really valuable. I do know that just like the one size doesn't fit all in the other things I've mentioned, some swaps are not super effective for some authors that I've worked with. They've been like, man, this is a waste of time. And I just don't really see any traction, even when we've worked really tightly on their audience. But then there are some cases where it's incredible. Like the results are just like, man, why am I not doing these all the time? And that's the whole winners and losers piece. So you really do have to continually test to see what works for you, and take some notes on it, and then continue to just refine until you are connecting with people and sharing with people who are, again, resonating with your audience, and you're resonating with them. And it takes some fine tuning for sure.
Mm. You talked about earlier that there's a scaling system for subscribers when you're, so you have to pay certain places, you have to pay more if you have more subscribers. So when you hit these upper limits of stuff, and you're ready to clean your list out, what kind of recommendations do you make for the author to clean out some of these dead email addresses?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Especially when you participate in big cross promotions, or you participate in a lot of contests, you can easily end up with hundreds, if not thousands, of subscribers on your list that just aren't opening or clicking. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean that they're not interested in your content, or they're not interested in you. Truth be told, a lot of users are Gmail users, and a lot of things end up in the promotions tab, not necessarily even by nature of all those, keywords you're avoiding, or how image heavy or link heavy you're trying to be. Sometimes that's just going to be the case because of the nature of the newsletter provider, or the nature of the content that has to be included. So it may mean that people just aren't seeing it. But of course, you don't want to keep paying for something that's not serving you. So then the tactical thing to do would be to say, okay, I need to assess who in this list I'm going to keep and who I'm not going to keep. And I recommend at that time that you do a re-engagement campaign. So that can look like sending out a newsletter, again, saying that you want to make sure that you can keep this newsletter available for all those who want to read it, but you also don't want to be filling up the inbox of those who are not interested, so that, if you don't get clicks, or if people don't want to fill out or give you some feedback or whatever on whatever call to action you've included in that newsletter, then you may remove them from the newsletter. And you'd be surprised how many people, perhaps it's FOMO, fear of missing out, but how many people say like, no, I know I haven't been opening, but I'll do better. It's very funny.
Yeah.
But a lot of the time, if you aren't showing up in their primary inbox, that won't help you. So you can send them a message separately, like through your own separate account, not through a newsletter provider, and tell them very shortly and concisely the same option that you've tried to reach out to them, and then see. So after you've gone through the steps of this, then you can go about culling your list and, deciding how many people you're going to keep or not, so that you can keep things tight and really efficient.
Okay. All right. So what else do you think is important for authors to consider when deciding how to approach their newsletter?
Well, your own voice, how you want to be experienced by your reader, how you want to make them feel, right? Anytime that you're sending something out, I think not only should you be thinking about how you want your reader or your consumer or your target audience to experience it, but then also what's your purpose in doing so, because that will help to guide you in the kind of content you want to create. And by far, we've talked about this before, but the more you can understand your reader and what interests them, the easier it becomes to create content to serve them, help them, inspire them, entertain them, etc., which makes your life easier, and then also has you connecting more easily and more deeply with your readership, which is wonderful. So, you can't escape the work of doing that, and it can be really fun, but knowing the steps for how to make that happen definitely helps.
Okay. All right. Well, Laurie, tell us where we can find you online.
Okay, absolutely. Thank you. You can find me at pub-craft.com, and you can also find me in my private Facebook group for authors. You can search hashtag #AskPubCraft on any social media platform, or you can just go to facebook.com/groups/AskPubCraft.
All right. Well, I've been Jordan Riley Swan. This has been Laurie, and we're out of time. That was a fast one. All right. Thank you for watching.
Cheers.